what is the broad story on how local journalism is doing? What's the temperature check? What do things look like right now?
It's very grim. It's extremely grim in local journalism around the United States. Most small communities can't, as we've talked about, don't have the size to sustain local television stations. So that's not an option for them. Most local radio stations, because of changes in the way radio is regulated by the FCC, don't produce local news anymore. Or don't produce very much of it. And those that do produce it are often ripping and reading from the newspaper or the wire services. So they're not doing much, if any, original local coverage. That has left the local newspapers of one kind or another, and those are folding. We have large and growing news deserts across America now, where the local newspapers have closed down altogether. And so there are literally no sources of local information. And we also have communities that have what we call ghost newspapers, which are smaller and medium-sized communities that still have newspapers that are being published, but the newspapers have been so totally stripped of resources. Many of them are owned by hedge funds that are just milking them for the local advertising revenue and not putting anything back into content. You have daily newspapers that basically have a staff of one reporter. You cannot cover a city on a daily basis with one reporter. And so they're filled with unedited press releases from anybody who wants to send one in, and all kinds of other junk content. And those are being called ghost newspapers because it looks like the town has a newspaper, but in fact, there's no local news or information.
And news and information is an economic driver. This is not just for our own good, it's for our community's health.
Yes, and that's really important, particularly when we talk about small communities and rural areas. One of the things that rural sociologists have found repeatedly over the years is that having a local newspaper and having a high quality local newspaper, and by that I mean a newspaper that does aggressive journalism, traditional journalism that is not a cheerleader or chicken dinner for the local chicken dinner news for the local community, but actually does serious journalism, is I would almost say a necessary condition for rural and small community sustainability. And that plays out in a number of different ways. One thing that has been consistently found is that rural communities that have serious newspapers that do a serious job of journalism are communities that are able to manage conflict and differences of opinion much better. And so they tend to be much more successful at attracting and maintaining economic development agendas, because anytime you're attracting a new factory to town or you're developing a new area, there are obviously going to be tensions and different points of view. And by having a journalism organization in your community that covers those and surfaces those different points of view, government and economic interests can work out those differences and succeed in making those projects work. I actually did research in a community that was self-destructing because of a conflict that had occurred 40 plus years before I had been there, that was handed down generation to generation in a rural community that did not have that kind of organization to surface that and help it talk out. And consequently, every time one of these parties tried to do something to help the community, the other party would sabotage it. And that's just an example of what rural sociologists find repeatedly in the absence of a high quality journalism organization. But there are other ways that newspapers and news plays a role too. And that is, research consistently shows that if you have news organizations, local news organizations in rural and small communities, that local people are much more likely to do what we call in-shopping, which means buying locally. And consequently, because they know that the products are there, they know the businesses are there through the advertising, they know that there's a sale on at their local store, the actual level of in-shopping rises, which of course means that those local businesses are sustainable. And particularly in communities that are in rural and agricultural areas, We know that so many small farms really struggle unless they have at least one person on the family farm who has an off-farm income. So when you're losing your local businesses because of people out shopping or buying online, or and not knowing that the businesses are there, the businesses are having a sale, that also hurts the agricultural economy. So media play an incredibly important role on many different levels in sustaining rural and agricultural communities.
If everyone isn't investing their eyeballs or their ears in good journalism, is that a sustainable model?
Catherine Graham, the former owner and publisher of the Washington Post, used to say good journalism is good business. And that by being fair and unbiased and trying to cover as many sides of every story and present as many points of view as you could and staying fact and evidence-based, you would attract the most readers. And that is true if readers are first interested in facts and evidence and want to grapple with truth. And secondly, if you don't have much competition for the attention and time, plus subscription dollars or advertising interest of those viewers. However, when you're suddenly in this hyper-competitive environment where you have all kinds of information choices, then human psychology kicks in. And suddenly a large part of your audience demonstrably is going to go off and set up their own little information bubble and only hear what they want to hear because that's their comfort zone. And so if you are staying on that evidence-based traditional journalism, let me tell you all the different points of view on this model, there are going to be a lot of people who are simply not going to be willing to hear that anymore because they have other choices. And those other choices make them more comfortable. And so a large part of the audience has left traditional news media. At the national and international level, I think good journalism is still a sustainable model because the national and international level, you have a critical mass of people who are willing to pay to get high quality news and information, high quality context about important topics, are willing to pay to get multiple viewpoints so that they can understand the bases of the arguments around important issues. At the local level, I think it's a very big question as to the degree to which that's sustainable. Probably it is sustainable in large communities. It is, I think, very questionable as to whether, to the degree to which it is sustainable in small communities if people don't make a commitment to support local journalism. And I think that's a very big question now.
If you've got everybody's ear for a minute, if you've got everybody's eyes for a minute, what would you share with viewers and listeners?
I think the most important thing I can say is those people who are investing themselves completely in disinformation are harming themselves, and they're also harming their community. News media, good news media, are really a critical element to any successful society, both politically, economically, and simply in terms of our own ability to manage our lives. And we have to find a way to sustain it because we will all suffer on many different levels if we lose quality news media that serve our communities, whether they're major cities or small towns.
Wow. I couldn't have said anything more powerful to have wrapped this up. So thank you for your time. I hope this is an ongoing conversation as we continue to look at democracy and the informed citizen. So thank you again and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's been a pleasure.